Okay, so have you ever noticed like how often you hear the word like aesthetic these days,
Yeah, it's everywhere, right?
especially online?
Yeah, like everyone's got their aesthetic, you know?
Right. So it's like, what does it even mean? I mean, is it just like something that looks good, or is there more to it?
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, that's what we're going to be diving into today
Exactly.
in our deep dive into aesthetic.
So we've got like a bunch of different sources for you today.
Yeah.
We've got discussions about how aesthetic is used in the context of like working out and getting that kind of physique.
Right, building the perfect body.
Yeah. And also how it's different from uh, aesthetic.
Yeah, which sounds similar, but it's a totally different concept.
Yeah. And of course, like all the dictionary definitions. So we're starting with the basics.
Yeah, got to have a solider foundation.
And we're going to look at how aesthetic is used and sometimes maybe misused out there in the wild.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically, we're going to figure out, like what does this word really mean? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
And how is it being used today?
Yeah, the origins, the evolution, and the usage.
Exactly. So when you hear the word aesthetic, it feels like it should be something,
Feels kind of weighty, right?
yeah,
It's got to have some depth to it.
more than just like a pretty picture.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's start with the root of it all, the
Mm.
philosophical heart of aesthetic.
Okay, let's do it.
According to Merriam-Webster,
Okay.
aesthetic is a branch of philosophy dealing with the nature of beauty, art, and taste, and with the creation and appreciation of beauty.
Wow. Okay, so it's a whole branch of philosophy.
Just the whole
We
thing.
haven't really thought about it like that.
It's not just a way to describe something. It's a whole area of philosophical thinking.
So there's some serious intellectual history behind this word.
Yeah, it goes way back.
It's not just some Instagram trend. Exactly. And to expand on that definition a little bit, one of our sources describes aesthetic as a philosophical theory or set of principles governing the idea of beauty at a given time and place.
Okay, so it's about like the ideas that shape what we even consider to be beautiful.
Right, exactly. It's like what makes something beautiful and how those ideas can change across different cultures and different periods in history.
Oh, that's so interesting because like something that people thought was beautiful, hundreds of years ago, we might look at it now and be like, I don't know about that.
Exactly. Tastes change, perceptions of beauty change.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not just like, I happen to like this painting. It's more like, why do I like this painting?
Right. And why did a whole society at a specific time find this particular style beautiful?
Wow, so it's like a much bigger concept than I initially thought.
It is. And to understand it even better, let's look at where the word itself comes from.
Okay, yeah, where did this whole concept originate?
So the word aesthetic comes from the Greek term.
Oh, here we go for the
So,
Greek.
we love our Greek roots. Aesthetikos, which means of a sense perception.
Of sense perception, so like how we experience the world through our senses.
Exactly how we see things, hear things, touch things, taste things, all of that.
So that makes sense.
And it's fascinating to think that the word itself, as we know it, aesthetic, was actually coined by a German philosopher named Alexander Baumgarten in the mid-18th century.
Alexander Baumgarten.
Mid-18th century.
Okay, so this word's been around for a while.
It's not a new invention.
It's not some, internet slang.
Nope, it's got history.
Right.
And while the term itself has definitely become more popular in recent years.
With the whole online thing?
Right, exactly. But the ideas behind aesthetics, these fundamental questions about beauty and art, have been around for centuries.
Yeah.
Philosophers have been grappling with these concepts since ancient times.
Wow. Okay, so it's a really old idea.
Really old.
And it's really cool to think that, like, when we use the word aesthetic,
Yeah.
today we're actually tapping into this, like, really long tradition of thought about beauty and art.
We're part of a long conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next time you see someone using aesthetic online, remember there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's not just a fleeting opinion.
It's a concept that thinkers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the philosophical root of aesthetic,
Yeah, deep stuff.
but now let's move beyond the formal definition and look at how the word actually functions in our language today.
Okay, so, like, how do we actually use it?
Yeah, in everyday conversation.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that aesthetic is a pretty versatile word.
Okay.
It can be a noun, it can be an adjective, it can even be an adverb.
Right, so it can be a thing or it can describe something.
Exactly.
Thank
So
you.
when aesthetic is used as a noun, it often refers to the pleasing appearance or overall look of something.
Okay, so, like, if you say a building has a nice aesthetic.
Exactly. You're talking about its overall look and feel.
Yeah.
Or it can describe a style or form of art, fashion, architecture, design, music, or literature.
Right. Okay, so it can be like a specific style, like, the Art Deco aesthetic.
Exactly, or the minimalist aesthetic.
Right.
It's a way to categorize or label a certain artistic approach or visual style.
Okay, so give me some examples from our sources.
Sure, one source mentions the machine age aesthetic and describes it as having clean lines, bare surfaces, and a sense of space.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you can, like, really picture that.
Right, it evokes a very specific visual style.
Yeah, like that kind of industrial look.
Exactly.
Okay, what else?
Another example is the Cubist aesthetic,
Oh, yeah, Cubism.
which refers to the artistic movement and its characteristic style.
Right, so it's like a shorthand way of describing a whole visual style.
Exactly. And then we have examples where aesthetic is used to describe a pleasing appearance, like a modern aesthetic of a building.
Okay, yeah, so that's just like saying it looks nice.
Right, it's got a pleasing aesthetic.
Okay.
And another example is a striking aesthetic of a painting.
So here, it's the visual impact that's being highlighted.
Precisely the way the artist has used color and composition to create a certain effect.
Okay.
You might also see a website described as having a clean and minimalistic aesthetic.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Right, where the focus is on a user-friendly and visually appealing design.
It's all about simplicity.
Exactly. And then finally, we have a natural aesthetic of an outdoor garden.
Okay, so here it's more about the beauty of nature.
Exactly. It's highlighting the inherent visual qualities of the natural world.
Okay, so as a noun, aesthetic can refer to a specific style or to the resulting pleasing appearance.
Right. It's a pretty flexible term.
So what about when aesthetic is used as an adjective?
When it's an adjective, aesthetic means relating to the appreciation of beauty or good taste.
Okay, so it's not describing the thing itself, but it's more about how we perceive it.
Exactly. It's about the realm of beauty and taste and how something fits into that.
Right.
And this is a key point. It's not always directly of an object itself, but it can preface a discussion or consideration of its qualities.
So instead of just saying this is aesthetic, you might say this has aesthetic qualities.
Precisely, or you might engage in aesthetic considerations when evaluating something.
So it's more about like the criteria we use to judge something's beauty.
Exactly, and then we have aesthetically, which functions as an adverb.
Okay.
And it works in a similar way, setting the stage for a discussion about how something relates to beauty or taste.
So you might say something is aesthetically pleasing.
Exactly. You're highlighting that its appearance aligns with our standards of beauty and good taste.
Okay, so that breakdown of noun, adjective, and adverb really helps clarify how aesthetic works in different situations.
Yeah, it's a word that wears many hats.
Okay, so now let's talk about how we hear aesthetic being used most often today, especially when people are describing their own personal style or online presence.
Yeah, this is where the meaning has really evolved and become a bit more broad.
Right, it's like everyone's got their own aesthetic now.
Yeah, exactly. And in this context, it often boils down to the overall style of someone or something like a musical sound interior design or even a social media presence.
Oh yeah, and people put a lot of effort into curating their online aesthetic.
Yeah, they want their profiles to have a certain look and feel.
Yeah, and this connects to the idea of a particular individual's set of ideas about style and taste, along with its expression.
Exactly. It's their unique approach and how they present themselves to the world.
So like a fashion designer might have a specific aesthetic.
Right, like the designer's aesthetic of accessible, wearable fashion.
Yeah, it's like their signature style.
Exactly. And someone might comment that a blog has a great aesthetic, referring to its consistent visual style and overall feel.
It's all about creating a cohesive look.
And it can go even deeper than just visual style.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it can also refer to one's set of principles or worldview as expressed through outward appearance, behavior, or actions.
Wow, so your actions can have an aesthetic too.
Exactly. It's about how your beliefs and values are reflected in how you live your life.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
And one of our sources gives a really thought-provoking example, the democratic aesthetic of the abolitionists.
Wow, so like their commitment to equality was reflected in everything they did.
Exactly. It was part of their overall aesthetic.
Okay, so how did this more casual use of aesthetic become so popular?
Well, it's interesting to consider the rise of aesthetic in the 2010s.
Okay.
It's often linked to the emergence of vaporwave culture on platforms like Tumblr.
Oh yeah, vaporwave.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's like all those 80s and 90s graphics.
Yeah, like those hazy visuals, bright neon colors
Yeah.
mixed with classical statues and old
Yeah.
computer technology.
Yeah, it was like a really specific look.
Exactly. Vaporwave had a very distinct and recognizable aesthetic.
Then definitely had a big influence on online culture.
Huge. And as social media platforms like Tumblr grew in popularity.
Yeah, everyone was on Tumblr.
People started curating their blogs and online presences around very specific themes, looks, and interests.
Right. It was all about creating a certain vibe.
And aesthetic became a very convenient way to describe that overall feel they were cultivating.
So it's like aesthetic became shorthand for saying something was cool or stylish.
Exactly. It became a more informal and accessible way to talk about beauty and style.
And we even have that example from one of our sources. My aesthetic is flamin' hot Cheetos fingers.
Yeah, that one really highlights the playful and personal way the term can be used online.
Yeah, it's definitely a far cry from the philosophical roots of the word.
It is, but it shows how language can evolve and adapt to new contexts.
So to sum up, we've seen how aesthetic can refer to a specific style or to a pleasing appearance.
Right.
And we've seen how it can function as a noun, an adjective, and an adverb.
It's a word that gets around.
And we've talked about how the meaning of aesthetic has broadened in recent years,
Especially online.
right, to encompass this idea of a personal style or vibe.
And now we're going to move on to look at how aesthetic is used in a few specific contexts.
Yeah.
Like, for example, you might hear someone talking about striving for an aesthetic physique in the world of fitness.
Oh, yeah. So, like, when someone's working out, they might have a specific aesthetic in mind.
Exactly. They're not just focused on strength or performance.
It's about how they look.
Right. They want to achieve a certain visual ideal.
Okay, so what does an aesthetic physique actually look like?
Well, one of our sources describes it as a balanced and visually pleasing combination of muscle size definition and symmetry.
So it's not just about being big and bulky.
No, it's about having a well-proportioned and aesthetically pleasing physique.
It's like a work of art.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about aesthetic, but what about ascetic?
Ah, yes, aesthetic.
Mm.
The word that often gets confused with aesthetic.
They do sound similar.
They do, and that's probably why people mix them up.
So what's the difference?
Well, ascetic describes a lifestyle characterized by self-discipline and self-denial, often for religious or spiritual reasons.
So it's about like simplicity and renouncing worldly pleasures.
Exactly. It's about living a very simple life.
And the word itself comes from the Greek asketikos, which originally meant laborious or rigorous.
So it's about discipline and hard work, but not in the pursuit of physical perfection.
Right, it's more about spiritual growth.
Exactly.
Okay, so aesthetic is about beauty and ascetic is about self-denial.
That's a good way to put it.
So how can we tell them apart in a sentence?
Well, our sources provide some good examples.
Okay.
One example is he lived an ascetic life renouncing material possessions.
Okay, so that's clearly about self-denial.
Right, he's giving up worldly things.
And then the other example is the aesthetic design of the building is striking.
And here, the focus is entirely on the visual appeal of the building.
Okay, so the context really makes it clear which word is being used.
Exactly, and it's important to use them correctly, especially in writing.
Yeah, because you don't want to accidentally say something's aesthetic when you mean it's aesthetic.
Right.
That could lead to some confusion.
Okay, so we've explored the definitions and how these words are used, but some of our sources also talked about how aesthetic can be misused.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, in modern language, particularly online, aesthetic is often reduced to simply meaning pretty or visually pleasing,
Oh yeah, I can see that.
without any consideration of the deeper philosophical implications.
So it's lost its depth.
Exactly, it's become more superficial,
And one of the articles even mentions the aesthetics wiki as an example of this.
where the term's complexity is kind of lost.
And it just becomes a label for something that looks nice,
Right, it's been simplified.
which is kind of a shame because aesthetic has so much more to offer.
It does, it's a really rich concept.
But at the same time, this more informal use of aesthetic has also led to some really interesting things,
Right.
like vaporwave music.
Exactly. It's taken existing sounds and visual styles and created something new and exciting.
So even if the deeper meaning gets lost sometimes.
There can still be positive outcomes. It's a double-edged sword.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into aesthetic,
Let's recap.
what have we learned?
Well, we've learned that aesthetic has a rich history rooted in philosophy.
Yeah, it's not just a trendy word.
It's a concept that's been around for centuries.
And it's about more than just what looks good.
It's about the nature of beauty, art, and taste.
And we've seen how aesthetic is used in a variety of contexts.
From describing personal style to evaluating works of art.
And we've discussed how the meaning of aesthetic has evolved over time.
Especially with the rise of social media.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is to be mindful of how you use the word aesthetic.
Doc?
Think about whether you're using it in a superficial way or if you're really engaging with its deeper meaning.
And I think it's also important to be aware of the different ways aesthetic can be used.
Exactly, because it's a versatile word with a lot of nuances.
So the next time you encounter the word aesthetic,
Take a moment to consider its full meaning.
and maybe even think about what aesthetic means to you personally.
Because it's a concept that's constantly evolving and changing.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into aesthetic.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.